what I want to talk about is the world that we live in today and what the implications of that are for the teaching that we do in the classroom. So if you could just take 13 seconds and look at these. And I simply want to ask you this. Think a little bit about what they all have in common. Now, chances are you were looking at the first 4 and you thought, well, they're issues. And then you got to election and you're like, well, I don't know how to feel about that. And then you got to education and you thought, well, that's not really an issue or a problem, right? But actually, I am going to say that what all of these have in common is that there are particular, obviously there are problems we're facing today, but there are particular kinds of intractable, difficult to solve problems. I came across a gentleman named Edmund Coe, who was an engineer when I was working in Hong Kong on a Fulbright, and he talked about the kinds of wicked problems that an engineer face. And he defined them by saying that they're a wicked problem as opposed to a tame problem. A wicked problem is constantly shifting. The dynamics are in flux. Things are moving. They're resistant to resolution. Sometimes the resolution that you used the time before doesn't work this time around. You have data that's incomplete or data that's contradictory. Sometimes the problems themselves are difficult to recognize. So if you go back and look at this previous slide, you know, the 2016 election, no models saw it coming quite like that. You know, obviously Nate Silver said it's only 81% chance that Hillary will be, so there's a 19% chance, 19 out of 100 models will predict that Trump will win. But nobody saw it coming, right? It was happening and we didn't even know it. Zika virus is very similar. The Zika virus existed for 30 years before it actually evidenced itself in South America. And then when it came to North America, we didn't know how it was transmitted, what the consequences would be, what kinds of environments the mosquito that carried it lived in. And so a wicked problem is a problem that's, it's a problem where basically you've got to do something, but traditional logics and traditional ways of approaching things just aren't going to work. But you've got to do something, right? You know, you've got to change a wheel on the bicycle as you're riding the bicycle down a hill very quickly. And the point that my friend Edmund Coe made about this, talking about engineers, he said if engineers are going to face wicked problems, they need to have wicked competencies. And my response to that was, if all of our students are going to face wicked problems, and they are, all of our students need to have wicked competencies. Think as well about the wicked workplace, right? You know, new technologies, new markets, new clienteles. What are the consequences of trade with China? 20 years ago, we thought, man, look at the size of that market. What could go wrong? Well, okay. New regulations. I have a friend who works with setting up new IPOs. And she says every time they go to the SEC, they follow the protocol, they follow the instructions. They go to the SEC, and the SEC's changed, new regulations. So you got to shift, you got to adapt. New challenges of every kind. And think about this too: students don't always get the jobs they want, nor do they go into the fields that they study, or do they stay in the fields that they study. Right? We know that you know, they're 22 or 25 or they're 35, but they graduate, they want to get a job, they get a job, they get that job, and they're in there for 5 years, and they're thinking, I wonder what else is out there. I wonder if this is really me. We know that 50% of teachers drop out in the first 3 years. We know that's a similarly high number for nursing. And even if they go into the jobs that they study for, they're not going to stay in the positions that they're the entry level. Or at least if we've done our job well, they won't, right? They'll move up. So my friend Kurt, who's an architect, you know, began drawing blueprints, and that was wicked enough because the technology and the software they were using constantly changed. So he constantly had to adapt to that. But then he got promoted, and all of a sudden he had to manage the entire office. Well, that's not something they taught him in architecture school, business management. And then he got promoted again, and suddenly he was dealing with hiring and firing and accounting. And then he got promoted again, and now he's a partner in the company, and his everything has changed. So as they rise up, different skill sets are required. The dynamics are changing. They have to pivot. They have to shift. And then I'd like to point this out, too, about the workplace. You know, here are our students. It's handy, right? Oh, I'm in my English class now. Okay, so you can make me write. Oh, but now I'm in my math class. You can't make me write. You know, this isn't an English class, right? There are rules. Well, they get into the workplace, it doesn't work like that. My father was a Lutheran minister. Geez, theology was like 1/20th of what he did, right? And then there was counseling, and everything just blurs together on a given day. So, point being, students are moving into a wicked world. They're moving into a complex world. They're moving into a world that we are only so capable of preparing them for, because we can only give them, as you pointed out, so much information. And then the information changes. Our fields grow. Knowledge expands. The dynamics, how we behave and don't behave with one another, change. So the question, what does it take to live in a wicked world? I'm going to posit the answer. Wicked students. Wicked students are open to new challenges because life is going to be nothing but, for all practical purposes. They approach those challenges in a deliberate and thoughtful way, not just problem, I'm going to react. They step back, they pause, they think. They're able to draw from multiple areas because, as we pointed out, most of the problems we're dealing with, is immigration a political problem or a social problem or an educational problem or an educational problem? How do these things work? They're able to adapt ideas and technologies and data from one area to another, so that even if they studied computer science, now they suddenly find themselves doing human resources. They can think about what they learned over here, and they can think, okay, it's not the exact same problem, but how can I shift it? Oh, that didn't work. So last thing, they're not afraid to fail and try again. I tried that. What can I do? How can I readjust? How can I move forward again? Because this is the kind of world that they're going to live in. All right? So then another question, because I like questions. We're academics. This is what we do, right? What does it take to create a wicked student? Well, the traditional answer is pretty simple. You give them content knowledge and you give them skill knowledge, and they're good. Now, content knowledge and skill knowledge matters. So don't, if anything else that I say really upsets you, don't claim that content matters. We need to cover content. Content is how students encounter new information, new ideas, absorb it, learn nuance, move from novice to expert. And we need them to do that, okay? But if this were enough, we would be fine. And we're not fine, because every day employers, students move into the world, they get hired for new jobs, and their employers say, and there's a brand new AAC&U Heart Research Associate study out, the employer says, about 33% are where we need them to be for entry level, and it's less than that for promotion level. So if this were it, we'd be good. I'm going to argue that it takes more than that. Here's what I'm going to say. It takes content knowledge, it takes skills, but it also takes something else. If I'm going to walk into the world, or walk into a room, or walk into my office, or walk into a particular work week, or walk into a new project, encountering something I've never seen before, I need to have content knowledge, I need to have skill knowledge, but I also need to have a sense of my ability to approach that problem. And that's not easy to come by. Now, because that phrase isn't nice and pithy, I actually try to use this term authority. What we need to do is not just give students content knowledge and skills, but we need to give them a sense of authority. Now, I want to very quickly say this, and this is really important. Here's what I don't mean by authority, okay? I don't mean authoritarian, I don't mean bossy, I don't mean arrogant, I don't mean dominant. You'll notice I don't even mean confident, right? Are you confident you can fix this problem? Yes, I am. Well, I guess I was wrong. Confidence is not enough, all right? Same with efficacy, self-efficacy. Do you think you can solve this problem? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can. Nope, guess I couldn't, So agency isn't even really enough. I like agency, but a 6-year-old in the cereal aisle of a grocery store has agency. And if you don't believe me, I can introduce you to my kids. So here's what I do mean by authority. I mean authority in this context, it draws from experience. It builds off of skills. It has to be earned. So another way to think about it is that content and skills create authority. Okay? As a student acquires information, they learn, and that helps move them towards authority. Okay? My friend Eric Amsel, who teaches mathematics, I'm going to use an example from him later from at Weber State in Utah. He also says authority, another way to think about it is authority, or it's authority over content and skills. You've mastered it to some degree. You have it under your belt. You need content and skills. Okay? But in addition to that, I mean, the reason that I use the term authority, I come from English, I come from a writing background, is that authority also relates to the idea of authorship, of creating something new, of moving forward, of moving beyond just how things are. Because if students are going to be interacting with a world that's complex and throwing challenges at them that they haven't seen before, they're going to need to not just have content and skills, but they're going to need to produce something new. Some new way of innovating, of moving beyond, of moving forward, of creating something that didn't exist before as a means of responding to this issue, to this problem. So think about it this way. Authority relates to content and skills, but it also moves forward. It's creating something. It's innovating. It's developing. I like that idea. You know, there's a Marcia Baxter Magolda talks about self-authorship, where students learn to construct their own identity, right? Not the identity that their parents or their friends or the religious groups or communities give to them. So self-authorship. And in my mind, this is sort of like world authorship. I want our students, all of our students, to be able to move into the world and create something, add something to it, make something more. How do you get there? Well, I think some people get authority by going into the military. I think some of our students come to college and they've got authority because they were in 4-H. And geez, if you can raise a cow, you know, and then sell it and then figure out how to do the accounts and all that stuff, that's pretty good. I think some students have jobs and they gain authority through that. I have a student named Shala. Her brother, when she was 14 years old, was diagnosed with cancer. She basically raised herself because her parents had to take care of her younger brother. She has authority. She's got it. I think some people have it for good reasons when they come to college already. I think some people have it for reasons I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with when they come to college. I spoke to a donor once, a guy who was a billionaire with a B, and his father had been a billionaire also with a B. And when I explained this concept of authority, he looked at me and said, no, you either have that or you don't. Ow. Actually, you should have seen his girlfriend. She did not look happy. So I didn't, you know. So yeah, he went home on a Learjet, but I'm not sure it was a smooth ride. So anyhow, the major point I think I'm going to make about authority is that authority can't be told. It can't be lectured. A person can't walk in the room and say, here's authority, and if you only grab it, you're going to get it. You'll be fine, you know. Authority has to be learned. And I'll take it a step further, and I just noticed this today, and this is another tweet that I had, but has anybody ever noticed this? Learned and earned are almost the same word, it's just one has an L and the other one doesn't. And see, this is why I call myself a geek, because this delighted me, and I thought, oh my God, you know, you're such, my kids are like, oh geez, Dad, shut up. So anyhow, it's gotta be earned. In other words, students need to be placed in situations where they have to assume authority. They have to, whether it's raising a cow, or being in the military and running a regiment, or you know, having a job. But they have to do it repeatedly. It can't be once. It has to happen multiple times, with increasing independence. You know, that it's maybe they get some structure at the beginning, but then they're increasingly, no, you need to take care of this now. It's your job. And in contexts where failure is an option, because failure has to happen in order for people to learn. Okay? Something came out just the other day that said that the optimal result for learning on an exam is 85%. They ran tests with AI, and if in a situation where a person has to move forward, where they're being pushed to the point where they have to think more, not just what I know, but more, they're going to get about an 85% on that exam. And I thought that was intriguing. So losing something, missing something is important. Okay. What does this look like? Well, okay, I gave you the first 3 points. Repetition, increasing independence, learn through mistakes. I'm going to add 2 additional points to this, and these come from the work of Randy Bass, who's at Georgetown. He does a lot of work with e-portfolios and that sort of thing. And he says students actually have to make meaning. And this is that idea of authorship again. You have to go beyond. You have to add something. You have to create something new. Maybe it's a completely new program. Maybe it's a completely different way of thinking about how to approach programming. Maybe it's a different form of poetry, you know. But they have to go beyond. They have to go beyond what they know, where they're comfortable, into someplace else. And they have to do it in context of uncertainty, where there isn't a clear answer. And again, what we're talking about here is reality, but what we're talking about is sort of bringing reality into the classroom, changing the dynamics of the classroom so that the answers aren't at the back of the book, or even the professor maybe isn't looking for the answer, but for the process. How is your mind working? Because in many ways, you know, what is the right answer for when the Gulf horizon exploded? Well, fixing it, but nobody knew what that was along the way, so they were going to have to try multiple things, okay? So I'm going to explore 3 different ways that this can come into play. I'm going to talk about day-to-day teaching. I'm going to talk about papers and projects and that sort of thing. And then I'm going to talk about exams. I kind of like the exam section. It's fun. I like to think about that. But these are sort of small practices, small changes you can make in the classroom where on a daily basis a student walks in and maybe they've read the textbook, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've watched a film. Whose project is that? Or maybe they haven't. Yeah. Yeah, there, right, good. Maybe they haven't. So what do you do? But what do you do so that when they're working in the classroom, they're not just getting some mastery over the content and skills, but they're getting used to this idea that I need to step forward, I need to do something more. So let me give you an example from computer science that's very simple. In class, go over a particular programming skill or idea or approach or concept related to creating apps, development of apps. In class, have students practice those problems, maybe even collaboratively. But then eventually, also in class, because you don't want to have them turn it in on a paper because they're going to think then that there's a right or wrong answer and they could leave the classroom, but you can and maybe go find it. But also in class, ask for something that requires them to go skills plus. Here's what I taught you, A, B, and C. Work with A, B, and C in your group. Oh, hey, look, here's the very last problem. Let's talk about this. And maybe what they do at the beginning of the class, as in the beginning of the semester, is they'll spend time in a group looking at that skills plus question, the question that pushes them 1 step or 3 steps further, and talk about, well, how might we approach this? And maybe towards the end of the semester, they're not going to say, how might we approach this? They're going to say, here's your skills plus problem. Take a shot. Everybody has 10 minutes, then we'll reconvene and talk, okay? Nurse practitioner, very similar. In class, go over a set of diagnoses. In class, students practice skills, diagnoses of problems or situations or case studies that engage that set of diagnoses, and then push it 1 step further. You know, I mean, it's funny how oftentimes the most resistant students I will find to this idea of wicked problems and not having right answers are the pre-meds. You know, I've learned it this way, and I'm very good at doing it this way. And you're like, what do you think is going to happen when you walk? I mean, have you ever had a doctor's appointment? You know, my doctor is like, well, it could be this, and it could be this. So what do you want to try? This, this, or this? You know, that's how he goes. Sometimes it is clear, but sometimes it's not. Geoscience, my friend Chris Connors talks a little bit about this. Early on in his semester, he will give students rock samples, data sets, and ask them for a mining recommendation or a drilling recommendation. And the early samples will have some pretty clear answers and minimal noise, which is the detritus, the data that doesn't really mean anything, right? Middle data sets will have moderate noise, but then multiple reasonable solutions that the student could take, but they have to find the solution. Later data sets, more noise than not, and every path out towards a recommendation or has to be constructed whole cloth by the student from nothing. And you could have 25 students in the class with 25 different recommendations. Or maybe they arrive at the same conclusion, but they get there in different ways. Physics. I had a faculty member talking about this yesterday. She said she wanted students to take more responsibility in the classroom, so she had each student come in and do a problem for the rest of the class on the board. And the students didn't like it. Part of my response is that whether they like it or not isn't really the point. But I got the point that she said it just didn't seem to work. So here's what I suggest. Students choose a problem on a given day. You know ahead of time. Maybe it's 2 students a day for 2 problems, or maybe you've got 3 students going, or 1 student a day, whatever. And you talk ahead of time. You know what problem they're going to do. They walk in, and rather than giving the perfect answer, they give 3 feasible, reasonable ways that you could actually solve that problem. And then what they do is they lead a discussion of the class about which one of those 3 we should choose. The focus changes. It's not about the right answer. It's about the multiplicity of approaches and talking about which of those approaches might be better or might not, and having a debate about it. Somebody I saw, there were notes, somebody's slides were flicking through, talking about metacognition. Is that yours? Okay, good. This is metacognition, right? They're not solving the problem, they're talking about how to solve the problem. And that's what professors do. And so they're adopting the authority of the teacher. Another example, mathematics. I mentioned my friend Eric Amsel earlier. He works with what are called double deficit students who come to college with remedial skills in mathematics and remedial skills in writing. What he does, and he's just received an NSF grant for doing this, is he has those students, of all things, go teach primary school students. You know? When I was in graduate school, I took 3 qualifying exams. Each of them was a weekend long. I picked up the exam Friday morning at 8. I dropped it off Monday at 4 o'clock. You know, you would think that would prepare me as an academic literary scholar. Nothing prepared me like having to walk into a room at 25 undergraduates and say, okay, this is Victorian literature and this is how it works. And we all know that from our own experience. The minute we have to explain it to somebody else, then we own it, then we got it. So this is brilliant in my mind. A similar example, maybe they can't actually get into the classroom or get into tutoring, so you have them write problems or solutions for the students, because that's a complex skill to have. What would the sample problems be, and then what would the actual problem be? What are the solutions? What complications? How does it demonstrate the skill that we're focusing on right now? Patrick Balls, B-A-H-L-S, he has students write exams for their own classes, exam questions, you know. And so what they're doing is they're thinking about what makes a good question. And in order to do that, they have to master, kind of from the inside out, the mathematical skill that's being discussed. All right. History, 4 mini essays where students come to, they're in groups, they come to class with a question about a particular artifact, they solve that question in a group, they write a mini essay worth 5%, and then they do it individually worth 25%. Interpersonal communications, this is a colleague of mine, she just gave a presentation yesterday that I really liked. What she does is the students come in a week ahead of time, they send her an email and say, this concept next week, Tuesday, there's 5 concepts in the class, I'm going to do this one. And then they meet with her 48 hours ahead of time. If they don't make either of those benchmarks, they just fail the assignment. And they come in and they say, here's the activity that I want students in this class to do in order to demonstrate the concept. And then what she does is she actually leads the discussion after the fact. So the students, they don't have to worry about the discussion, they don't have to worry about what it takes to ask a good question, leading it, because that's a whole different skill set. They just have to think, this concept, which I'm seeing in words, but I want them to enact in reality, how can I bring that to life? And when a student does that, shifts from one genre or modality to another, that's when they're owning the information. That's when it really becomes something that they're mastering. So another example, oh no, it's a project. I'll show you a project in a moment that gives another example of it. Another example of that would be my friend D.B. Poley, who teaches biology, and she has students, she wants them to get the concept of DNA to RNA. Is anybody a biologist in the room? Okay, I don't even know what that means. Do I have that more or less right? Is that kind of, okay, good. So she has them create a cartoon for a non-biologist so that the non-biologist will understand it. So it changes from written form, conceptual form in the head to visual form, and then you've got to explain it to somebody else. So interesting, right? To do that, you have to really know the materials. Thinking about papers, projects, I probably have too many examples on this, but let me throw a couple at you. Literature. Give them an assignment where the business department is changing their major, and your job in this class is to explain to the business department why poetry should be taught in the class. Why do business majors need poetry? Okay. Now, a couple things I really love about this. It can apply to any department. You can do it anywhere, right? But it asks students to take information from one context to another context and think about how and why it works. To think about the conceptual skills that may overlap, but also to think what it might bring to a different field. I also like the fact, frankly, that it's possible. You know, I've got students in my, I might have a business major in my poetry class, and I'm looking and going, you know, I don't care about poetry. I still don't care about poetry. And part of me is like, okay, you still have to do the assignment, and here's why. Because in today's world, the ability to step into a different perspective and occupy that and think about it from the inside out, oh my God, we need that so badly, right? In so many different ways. So this asks them to approach a field in ways that they wouldn't before. Art history. It's just that one little tweak, right? If it could be about death, it would be easy, but it can't be, because guess what? Grief is much more complicated than just the initial death. So where can we go beyond it? How can you think about these things? How can you think about the ways art functions? How can you think about the way something functions in one setting and may have one purpose, but might work in another setting in a different way? Another art class? Here's what I like about this. There's a couple things. One, the course is actually not just art, it's community murals, so it's a more appropriate content. But one, I like the fact that it puts an art student in the context of something going budget, math, community. Oh my gosh. You know, recognizing that the real work of an artist actually engages more than just the creation of the art. The other thing I really like about this, it's a first-year seminar. First-year seminar. Right from the beginning, they have to take on these big questions and big ways of thinking about how art functions. That's a real one, by the way, from Wesley College in Dover, Delaware. And then here's one I was thinking about earlier. I like this one. It's from my friend Tony Weiss down at Tulane. Economists in the room? Okay. I don't even know what modes of production are. But I like the idea that it's an abstract concept that they have to somehow turn into a physical form in a way that's going to communicate effectively to students in a beginning class. And not just, so they're moving, they're translating information and owning that information along the way. So thinking about exams, I already told you this is my favorite area. You know, yes, we need to test in our classes that they have mastered the content, they've done the reading, they've watched the videos, they've been part of the conversations. But surely there's room to test these other things, synthesizing, pulling things together, making meaning, dealing with uncertainty, particularly since you can't do meaning making in a class unless you know the content of that class. You can't synthesize ideas within a class unless you know the ideas in the class. Right? So somewhere on the exam, is there room for a question like this? Because in life, it's not about you reading over and over and over again poetry or literature that you've read before and can identify. It's about you encountering new works and being able to sift your way through that. Art history does a lot of this. Here's a painting you've never seen before. And what I love about it is when an art historian, not only do they show them a painting they've never seen before, they might show them a painting by an artist they've never encountered before, and they might show them a painting by an artist they've never encountered before from a completely different era. So the student's looking at the painting, trying to analyze how it fits into realism, and it's not realistic at all. So it's not about the answer, it's about their ability to process, to figure out, to see, to deal with anomalies, to deal with uncertainty, to deal with those moments of mental conflict where you're like, what the heck? How am I going to make sense out of this? Then there's this one, probably inappropriate, but this here again, you can apply this to pretty much any field, right? And what I like about it is that the kind of work they're doing, they still have to read. They're still doing literary exegesis. None of that's changed. The kinds of work they're doing are the exact same kinds of work. They're just doing it in a different way. And there's no right answer. I'm actually going to guess. I mean, the fact is that William Wordsworth was very tall. He was 5'10", which is unusual for that period. But Ezra Pound had so much anger in him that I'm pretty sure that Pound would win, right? But they don't necessarily know that. So.
Well, if you look at some of his poetry that is very conservative,
Yeah.
and dogmatic.
Yeah.
You might get a sense of what his personality would be.
I got the impression reading Pound, he wasn't a guy I'd want to hang out with.
No.
Yeah, there's never any question. But frankly, T.S. Eliot, I feel a little more sympathy towards, but I'm still not sure I wanted to hang out too much. So, biology, physiology, argue for or against the feasibility of a flying horse. Again, there's not a right answer here, but show me how your brain works. And in order to show me how your brain works, you have to have mastered the concepts and the information from the course. Evolutionary psychology. Not a right answer, but show me. You can't answer that without knowing the content of the course. So 3 different ways. What do we do in the classroom? If we're going into a wicked world where there's uncertainty, the content is crucial, but so is the attitude, the sense, I can do this, I'm not afraid of this. And we need to make sure that that sense of, I'm not afraid of this, I can do this, is not just the A students or the older students or the rich students, but all of the students, because who knows when you're going to have a C student running the country, for instance. But here's the interesting thing. They also, when they do this kind of application and working through things, they're actually learning the content more deeply. They're applying it in complicated ways. They have to think about or conceptualize it in complicated ways. And in order to do that, they're going to remember it. It's going to be written into the neuronal networks much more effectively than simply, here's content, hand it back to me on the exam, which only purpose is memorizing it for the exam, and then it disappears. But also, they're going to walk out with a sense of their ability. I can move into the world. I have the right to move into the world in powerful ways to engage these problems. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your patience and your attention. Other thoughts? Other questions? I don't want to belabor anything. I know we have some very good presentations coming up. No? Okay. No.
So thank you very much. I actually scribbled down 2 assignments that I'm going to use this
Oh,
semester,
good. Excellent.
so
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. And one of them is really, I teach entrepreneurship, and one of the assignments would be related to that. I think this will be really, really helpful in that regard.
Good.
The other one I just wanted to share because I think a lot of us might be able to benefit from it. So I have online discussions using Blackboard, right?
Right.
So the students have to read a chapter and then answer some questions and then discuss about it. But I love the idea of then having them be assigned. You sign up for one of those, and then it's your job to come in and explain this, to synthesize the discussion to the class, and maybe include some problem-solving piece of that too.
Right.
Just starting to think about it. So thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, the physics example that I gave earlier, the key to that is because they're asked to bring in multiple approaches. This is basically design theory, right? Don't take one approach, take multiple approaches. It shifts the purpose, which allows them to think not just about the content and about right and wrong, but beyond that. So yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. Good, good. Hand went up over here. I don't want to. Okay. Oh.
Mike, please. Over here. Could you go back to the Wordsworth slide?
Sure. Everybody.
So I'm looking at
am I going to get in trouble? I mean, in the past, they put these videos up on the internet, so the whole world is going to see my Wordsworth drunken bar example. Go ahead.
I'm looking at your book, which I got a copy of this morning, and I'm just wondering, what a rubric for assessing this assignment would look like and what students would know about how this assignment would be assessed as they complete it.
That's a great question. Okay. Is your background English? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what you begin with is by saying, what would a good answer look like? What would be the components that would be in the good answer? Well, a good answer, well, I say here, it's got to have literary analysis, and it's got to have their extra literary writing, so the writing they did about writing. So those are going to be two things. They've got to have good literary analysis. So this is me building the left side of the rubric. And by the way, I'm not a huge rubric person, okay? But I think it's an interesting exercise to think about what you're looking for. So first one's going to be careful literary analysis, and then you've got what really bad literary analysis looks like and really excellent literary analysis looks like and everything in between. And then you've got their ability to analyze the extra literary views. Then what else? What else would be there? What else would be important for answering this question? Well, can you analyze literature? Sure. Can you analyze theory? Okay. What else?
Well, you have to remember the poems that you read by them to use as support
Yeah.
for the conclusions of your...
So content and evidentiary accuracy, that would be a good one.
We need claims, grounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, the fourth area I would put, the final one would be, how do you draw your conclusions? What's the logic you're using to make the claim? You could add a fifth one about history and context. I don't know, what do you think? Would you add anything else? Look at me being the teacher. So.
When you said, I'm not a big rubric person,
Mm-hmm.
when you said I'm not a big rubric person,
Right.
I was immediately skeptical because I think the rubric is the thing that tells the students how they're going to be assessed fairly and
Yep.
what they actually have to do
Yeah.
with the prompt.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll tell you what. I don't feel strongly enough about this that I go to war or I write about it. I mean, there are 2 or 3 rubrics in the back of the book, right? So
I'm looking at
yeah,
them right now.
You're looking at them, yeah, and they're not bad, I will say.
Give the mic to somebody else.
So, for me, there are 2 things that drive my thinking on this. 1, or 3 things, really. The first one, again, is just to restate, I find the creation of a rubric a very powerful dynamic because it's the instructor articulating to him or herself exactly what they're looking for. Even better, it's faculty creating a rubric together to articulate to each other what it is that they're looking for. In terms of my wariness of rubrics, one of them is just simply a brilliant student of mine named Uni from the Baltimore area. She's of Jamaican descent. And, but actually, the second point is, if you're going to give them a rubric and tell them your work is going to be evaluated based upon this, they have to then do something with the rubric. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of words on the page. Right. They have to go inside, maybe when they're doing peer response. My friend Hannah Robbins, and I love this, she's a mathematician. When her students do oral presentations, she gives 2 oral presentations, one good, one bad, and then the students design the rubric for the oral presentations. That's brilliant, because that's authoritative. But I just had this moment with a student, Uni, who I adore. She just in my office earlier this week. She's not one of my advisors anymore, but I wanted to use a rubric. So I was doing paper conferences, and so I had the rubric sitting on the desk, and so we would do the paper conference. And at the end, I would say, I'm not sure if you're familiar with rubrics, and this is a preliminary one, but if I were to assess your paper right now, you'd be kind of here or here, or where would you think you would be, here or here or here? And when I got to Uni, I said, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with rubrics, and she goes, well, I know I'm more than what's in those little boxes.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I took him, and I was just like, but that's probably convenient for me, right? It allows me to do something that I'm not comfortable with anyhow, and I don't know that it's good practice. I'll be frank about that, And I think everybody has to. I mean, one of the points I always make, and this is not a workshop, so I'm not going to make it necessarily, but one of the points I always make is always for any pedagogical approach, you have to adapt it to who you are as a teacher, who you want to be as a teacher. You have to then push the envelope for yourself, and you have to adjust when you fail, because it will fail. And it's very easy to go, oh, stupid, I can't believe we did it, and throw it away. But that's not legit, right? I mean, if we're asking our students to try again, if as scientists we know we try again, if as scholars we know we try again, we need to do it with teaching as well. So, does that make sense? Yeah, I feel like I've just gone public with a dirty little secret. I don't like, oh, my name is Paul and I don't like rubrics. So,
Well,
please.
can I add to that? Because I think going with your way of thinking before you confessed about you're not using rubrics all the time, I also think that it's appropriate to have rubrics in a course where there's a standardized curriculum.
Yeah.
You know, for example, so we're teaching composition, and
Yeah.
students need to be able to do certain things
Yeah.
that they'll be judged in their subsequent classes on whether they know how to
Yeah.
do that or not.
Yeah.
But I think particularly talking about something like literature or psychology or sociology, I even find this. If I have a rubric, then again, I get somewhat formulaic work. And I like to be surprised by students. And so I can give you an example. I never presented this scenario, but I've had students answer questions instead of writing a paragraph or something where they wrote what was a hypothetical interview or pretending to be the person
Right.
and revealing something,
Right.
you know, in a memoir or writing an answer in the form of a poem,
Right.
which showed
Right.
that they understood
Yeah.
all of these things,
Yeah.
but they also put something else of themselves into it
Yeah.
that was beyond the normal
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah.
And so you're right, it's very difficult because you have to be able to account, if you are evaluating it, how much value you're according to that. But the other thing that occasionally I do, because students sometimes come in and they want me to tell them, this is exactly what to do. And that's not what I'm teaching literature for. I want to help them
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
why people derive pleasure
Yeah.
from reading
Yeah.
and to be open to just trying to read lots of different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then from there, they can do what they want with it. They
Yeah.
might just be entertained, they might be educated, they might
Yeah.
be challenged, they might
Yeah.
work through their personal problems,
Yeah.
whatever. But after a while, students will get with it because, as you said, there's not high risk, there's lots of activities they get to do, but the other is that I'll provide them examples of work that students did in previous semesters that's not with the same piece of reading, it's not exactly the same question, so instead of saying there's no right or wrong,
Yeah.
because I find if I say, well, there's no wrong, some
Yeah.
students will give me whatever
Yeah.
easy
Yeah.
answer
Yeah.
they can,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I
there's
teach
no weight
creative
to
writing.
it.
You know,
Right,
so, yeah.
as opposed to, I really
Yeah.
want them to go out there
Yeah.
beyond,
Yeah.
outside the box to think. And
Yeah.
so in showing them what some students did in response to
Yeah.
a prompt or a question,
Yeah.
that gets their creative juices flowing in some ways.
Yeah.
And for students who are not particularly creative, I give them occasionally an opportunity to work with someone else. So they share their strengths, but that's just, you know, some things that I've enjoyed doing that are more along your lines.
Yeah.
Outside the rubric.
And I mean, if anything, the example I use from my colleague Hannah Robbins. So I'm actually, the irony of this is on Wednesday next week at the Association of American Colleges and Universities conference. On Wednesday morning, I'm doing a workshop on, guess what? Rubrics. Yeah, but what they did is they called me and they said, listen, we want you to do a workshop, but we want you to deal with they said, here's a provocative idea. What would happen if we turned these rubrics, these over to the students? And I thought, okay, yeah, I'll try that. I'll give that a try. So one last question, I guess?
Okay.
Okay, two? Okay, good.
I'm
Yeah.
going to move away from Ezra Pound
Okay.
and Wadsworth to the social sciences. I teach anthropology, and the cornerstone of my class has always been getting students to do participant observation.
Right.
And I think one of the best things that I've learned over the years as an instructor is they have a section of the paper where they can kind of say, where did it go wrong, right? Where did
Yeah.
it go wrong? And
Yeah.
sometimes the paper where they're actually describing the cultural information they got is not so wonderful. And then you get to that. And you realize they got it,
Yeah.
right? They didn't
Yeah.
get the result, but they
Yeah.
got it. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, trying to encourage them to think about the process for them
Yeah.
is really pretty essential.
Well, and it's funny, right? Because, you know, that quote about the beautiful problems and engaging the things that what we love as scholars, what gets us going, is when we find something that doesn't make sense. that's neither nor, that's contradictory. And Kathy Takayama, who's a biologist at Brown University, says, you know what, as scholars, it's those liminal spaces that are kind of in between that we know are rich. That's where our best thinking and work comes from. And she says, and we also know that, you know, I mean, I'm at a very traditional college, 18 to 22, most of our students. It's different here, I know. But we also know that oftentimes when our students come to us, they're in between. You know, for me, they're in between childhood and adulthood. For you, they might be in between jobs or in between countries. They're in a liminal space. And what do we do for 4 years or 2 years or 3 years? We push them out and tell them we want the right answer. You know, no. The goal should be to help them use the richness of that liminal space. So, okay, I think I've gone way over. I apologize for that. Thank you very much. Great job.